record on the computer. There we go. Yes, so we're still dealing with kind of natural things, right? If you remember the first one, it was rain and hail mixed with blood and fire, and it affects the trees, right? The second one, I believe, was the mountain,
Mountain burning.
Burning
right?
with
The
fire.
mountain burning, which is thrown into the sea, right? Salt
Yeah.
water, and it destroys, the
creatures.
fish and the boats and things like that. And then last week we talked about the falling star, I believe, right?
Yeah. Wormwood.
The star falling, which falls in the rivers and creates wormwood, right? Or bitterness or
His name was
poisoned water.
Wormwood, right?
Yeah. So everything that we've been reading until now have really been, if not like natural events, like natural in the sense of like ecological, right? Like plants and things like that. And if it's not, and if it's symbolic, then it's still the imagery is all based on the ecology and the world and things like that. And this fourth one is following in the same pattern, right? So the fourth angel sounds, nothing falls, which is interesting, right? In the other cases, it's things falling from the sky. In this case, it's the sky itself, right? That changes. So again, we get that word third appears all throughout the four seals, the four trumpets so far. So a third of the sun is struck, a third of the moon is struck, a third of the stars, and a third of them were darkened. A third of the day does not shine, likewise the night. So I don't know how the night gets a third darker, but that's what it's telling us, right? In every aspect, the sun, the moon, the stars, the sky, the day, the night, all of it is reduced, is darkened by a third. So to help understand this, what I do all the time is I take some of the key words and I try to find them in other places in the Bible. All right. So the first thing I believe that I try to look up is the sun, the moon, and the stars. When do we see these three things together? Interestingly enough, we find it in Isaiah 13, and I'll read that here for us. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. So we're talking about the day of the Lord, right? The second coming, all of that stuff. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. So this one very much seems to be very, at least similar. It might not be talking about the same thing, but we're seeing the same thing happen here, right? Where we're talking about the end times, and Isaiah is pointing towards the heavens and saying the stars, the sun, and the moon will be darkened, right? Will lose their light. So again, there might be a connection there. It definitely sounds like it is, like we're talking about something very similar here. But let's compare that with Genesis 37. Now, this one's completely different, though also a prophecy. This one is coming from Joseph. You probably know the prophecy here, but let me read this one here. So this is Genesis 37. This is still when Joseph is with his family before he's sold into slavery. Verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed bow down to the earth before you? The reason why I added this in here is in this prophecy, it explains the symbolism or possible symbolism of the sun, the stars, and the moon. The sun representing the Father, the moon representing the mother, and the stars representing the children, right? So when we go back into Revelation, that's a possibility, right? Perhaps the sun, the moon, and the stars represent other things, right? Not necessarily the sun itself, but maybe it represents something else. So I threw that in there just to get us thinking, right? So some possibilities. The other one is actually found in Revelation, where these three words are found together, which is another interesting. You can see how it can connect to Genesis 37, because here the sun, the moon, and the stars are actually connected to something else. So Revelation chapter 12, everyone loves chapter 12. It's a great chapter. Verse 1. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars, right? So you see the three together again. In this context, it's very much connected to the church and really to God, right? So clothed with the sun would represent the glory of God. With the moon under her feet, um, you
That
can
word.
debate what that means, possibly the Holy Spirit or the church or even Jesus. And on her head, a garland of 12 stars, which 12 usually represents God's people, right? 12 apostles, 12 disciples, 12 tribes, and so on. The reason why I'm saying the moon can represent Jesus is because we know the woman represents the church, right? And the foundation of the church. So what's holding the woman is the moon, which is usually either the Bible or Jesus, right? That's what we say the foundation of the churches is Jesus or the Bible. So here, a lot like Genesis with the story of Joseph, the sun, the moon, and the stars have kind of heavenly representations. So possibly God the Father, Jesus, and God's people, something like that. So it's another possibility, all right? Well, let's not get there yet. So let me go back into, so those are the verses that I found that have those three words, the sun, the moon, and the stars, all right? So any ideas? What have you learned about the fourth trumpet throughout your studies? Anyone?
I am going to my study Bible. Excuse me. I'm going to my study Bible here. And it says, in the 9th plague in Egypt, thick darkness covered the land for 3 days. References to the Egyptian plague suggest that in Revelation, we have the final exodus of God's people from the bondage of a world controlled by sin.
So that's an interesting take. Yes, the idea of darkness, you find it in the Egyptian plagues. You find it here in the trumpets, and you also find it in the 7 plagues, right? This painful darkness. It's kind of hard to explain, but this painful darkness will also appear when we talk about the 7 last plagues. So one possible explanation is a literal one, right? Which is there will be these days of darkness, right? Where the sun itself will literally turn dark. We know it's happened before, right? We've talked about that prophecy where the sun went dark and the moon turned to blood and so on. So it could be literal in that sense, right? There will be, if not this day or possibly days, where the light will be kind of, reduced, where we'll get a reduction of light. So that's like the most literal explanation. It's interesting that the Bible compares it to the idea of salvation, right? That it's during this time that God's people will be delivered. It makes sense because we know we're getting closer to the end, right, of the 7 trumpets. And obviously the ending is, talking about the second coming and all that. So that's a possibility. Anyone else? Anything else that you've studied or read or heard?
Well, I was thinking of the under the 6th seal.
Mhm.
There's it's not that these things were struck, that it says that the sun and moon and sun became dark, or the sun became like blood and so on. But it takes the three planets or systems,
Yeah.
the stars, the sun, and the moon. And there were changes in those.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is that when the fourth angel sounded, these things were struck.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say who struck them or strikes them. You know, so the tense here is not like an active voice where it tells you who is actually doing the striking
It's just
of these
what
bodies.
happens. Yeah.
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 So, but all the way back in Genesis, it says when God flooded the world, you know, but after that he says, you know, night and day and so on will continue. And so apparently he didn't decided to strike them, because he said these are the day and night and so on will continue. But in this case, something is happening. Something is striking, using the text here, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and it's bringing about this darkness.
It's more violent,
you know,
right? It's more. It's like an attack almost.
Right. So who actually is doing this?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's one of the questions. And I know with when we go back to the traditional things, writers like Morvan Maxwell, he suggests that this is this trumpet is the church becoming worse because of the the apostasy. You know, the church is becoming
the truth becomes darkened, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This is the increasing in apostasy from we had the third trumpet that says, this is the Roman church, and this is judgment against the Roman church. And the fourth trumpet is the Roman church. The apostasy is becoming worse. See? And so this is judgment against that. One of the questions is that apparently the early writers of Revelation use the seals, the six seals, the sixth trumpet, or we can say all six seal or seven seals, seven trumpet, and the seven bowls all seem to be God's judgment upon or retribution upon humankind. And if this is the case, when you go back to Isaiah 14, it talks about Satan who has made this world a wilderness because of the things he has done. Where is Satan in all of these?
Yeah.
If God is providing retribution in the seals, the trumpets, and the plagues, where is Satan? Does he exist? What is he doing?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that goes back to the idea of the striking, right? Again, it's an attack on the sun. It's an attack on the moon, on the stars, which God himself wouldn't really do. But it makes sense that it's something that, you know, Satan would. Even the darkening of the churches, though. So even if you do take the traditional view, I don't think anyone says that it's God doing that to the churches. You know, it's Satan's, you know, influence over the churches that would have done it. So either way, you're seeing that as this is Satan's work happening here, right? So I think that one's fairly clear. God is all about light, right? God doesn't want darkness. So this definitely has to be an act of Satan here. Yvonne, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Would this have any connection with when Satan was thrown out of heaven and he took a third of the angels with him?
Well, that's I think Tungsten mentions that, right? When we hear the word third, it represents the work of the third, right? So this is like the devil's angels at work. You know, they're the ones darkening the sun, the moon, the stars. They're the ones destroying a third of the fish, a third of the ships, a third of the sea, the rivers, and so on. So the third, because we know that, right? We know numbers in the Bible have symbolism to them. So when we talk about three, a lot of times we're talking about God, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. When we talk about 12, most of the time we're talking about God's people. When we're talking about 7, it's perfection. 6 being imperfection or Lucifer. And so a third, because of that text in Revelation 12, could very easily represent, yeah, this is not the angels themselves, but the work of the angels, right? So they're the ones at work doing these evil things, right? So that's definitely one of the opinions, right? That's one of the explanations. Yeah.
Of course, out of this, Tongstad's view is, again, these are demonic powers are creating this problem, the darkening. And so that's right throughout his take, that all of the trumpets. And I think for the, I was trying to see where he makes mention of the second trumpet and the third trumpet, because the third trumpet, the star falling from heaven, we know that's in reference to Lucifer, because there's a lot of references to that. Isaiah 14, there's, I think, Luke chapter 10 or 11, I can't remember which one of those. But even to the second trumpet, this mountain falling into the sea, there's a reference to that again, where the reference to that is Babylon. Sometimes the description of Babylon and Tyre, it is not really Babylon or Tyre, but it's a reference to Lucifer himself.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be a lot of references. And even the fifth and sixth trumpet, later on we come up to those, we have similar references. So all of these trumpets, to my mind, and there's biblical references, seem to be these, as Tongstad said, he says he's using that revelation where it talks about the third thrown from heaven and so on by the tail of the dragon. That is in reference to these thirds, that he figures this is a reference to demons doing these things that are here in the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see why that makes sense, right? It's definitely the newest understanding of it, right? It's very different from the traditional, but you can see how there is merit to it, right? You can see where he's getting his ideas from, and it's from the Bible. So it's definitely something that whether you choose to believe it or not, I think it's definitely still something good to think about, right? To kind of look it over and say, okay, if it is this way, what does that mean, right? What does that mean to us? So for instance, if this idea of the thirds really does mean the demonic forces, right? The God, or not God, Satan's army, Satan's angels, then what we're seeing is the fact that God is allowing Satan so much leeway, right? He's allowing Satan he's permitting him to do so many things throughout history. One thing that's important to remember is at least these the four trumpets that we've read so far, God never allows it to be a complete destruction, right? You never get a destroy all the trees or destroy all the sea or all the fish or all the, right? God always places a limit to how much destruction these evil forces are allowed to do, right? So God, and we read this throughout the Old Testament, right? God sets the line of how far the sea can enter into the land and so on. So if you at least think about that way, and then you say, okay, what's the lesson here? Then that's a strong one, right? That's basically saying, listen, yes, Satan still exists. Yes, his angels still exist. Yes, they're destructive forces, but ultimately God is still in control. Ultimately, God is still deciding how much they can and cannot do, which means, especially for God's people, who God promises he'll, protect beyond, a regular person, we should live in safety, right? We should live without fear, without anxieties. For instance, even this pandemic that's going on, there's a lot of people that are deathly afraid, that are mentally really suffering because of what's going on. But what we're learning from these is, listen, yes, there are bad things happening in this planet. Yes, bad things occur. But if you're with God, you're safe with God, right? You can trust in God. It doesn't mean you should do stupidness, right? It's not like Satan when he says, just jump off the building and the angels will save you. So it's not testing God, right? So, well, God's with me, so I can do whatever I want. No, it's saying no matter what's happening on this planet,
Take
if I
precaution.
put my trust in God, then I can depend that what happens to me is God's will, right? Satan will never be able to do something in my life without God knowing about it, without God accepting it,
Permission.
right? And the Bible is very clear that God will not give you more than you can handle, than you can take, right? So just with that teaching, right? You should have peace. You should have, peace in God that he's in control, right? So I think as a bare minimum, we can learn that today. Anything else, Ken, that you kind of gleaned out of this verse here? It's on mute. It's on mute, Ken. We can't hear. We can't hear. You gotta take it off mute. There you go.
There was one with on the second trumpet. There was a text found in Jeremiah 51. I thought it was interesting text. It's 51:25. It says, "Behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, who destroys all the earth, says the Lord." Now, it started with a reference to Babylon, but Babylon hasn't destroyed the entire earth. So this is more than Babylon. Then it continues, "I will stretch with my hand against you, roll you down from the rocks and make you a burnt mountain. And so again, the reference here is a burning mountain falling out of the sky into the sea. It's a text that gives you the kind of reference that you're looking for.
Yeah, so, for sure. That's definitely a good connection there, right? You're getting this burnt mountain idea, this burning mountain, and its destructive forces, right? The fact that it can destroy,
Which where does that come from?
That is Jeremiah 51.
Jeremiah 51. What verse?
And the verse is, just give me a quick second here.
20 something?
25, I think.
25.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But just read the whole chapter, it's better. Just read.
Yeah. But again, when you look at the very first trumpet, it is unusual as to see hail and fire mixed with blood.
Yeah.
And so again, Tungstad in his references, those are demonic reference to demonic beings. Those are very strange things. It's not, you don't find those in the natural world.
It's not a natural occurrence.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at all of these, the first four trumpets, including the one with the sun and the moon and so on, it was struck by something that makes them dark. And even the very light is struck. And there's no human being who can, bring about a third of the light, takes away a third of the light of the day or the light of itself. One can see maybe the sun, the stars, and the moon being struck, but the light of itself, it's struck. It's very unusual. Yeah.
Does he say it's literal then? Does he say that it's like the physical sunlight will be diminished, or does he give that like a spiritual twist or something?
Yeah, I think there's a spiritual twist that these are demons are causing many of these darkening. Maybe it's similar to the apostasy, increasing apostasy, because some people are writing in their revelation studies that this might be more what they call maybe secularism, more capitalism and nihilism and all of these various communism. And this is a particular period in time when these things are coming about.
And that makes sense too, right? Because up until this, go ahead.
Yeah, but he doesn't believe, because he was looking at all of these and measuring them, and he says, if all of these were correct, what about the others? For example, he talks about in the case of if there's major things like these happening at the time, what about some of the things like Auschwitz and some of the major things that occur? There's no mention of those things. So he thinks that these tragedies in the world, he doesn't believe in these specific time periods.
Yeah, yeah. So this is just things that happen throughout
broadly.
Yeah.
Because from the beginning of the first century, I mean the first century AD, when this book of Revelation was written, that we have had many wars. I mean, with the Romans, then there was with the Arabs and the Turks and the Mongols, you know, the movement of Islam and the Turks and the Mongols, and then we have the European wars and the First and Second World War. We've been having wars all the time. Yeah. So his idea is there's nothing to say there are specific time periods, but it's just generally, it is like God is revealing that these distress and chaos will come upon us. And we need to be aware that these things are going to happen in the world.
Yeah. So, Louise, you're asking whether there's like a connection to the Catholic Church. In the traditional, so if you look at like the early understanding, it would be yes, right? So yeah. You have, you know, the church, which then kind of gets corrupted, and the light of truth becomes darkened, right? Yeah. So that's the traditional view, absolutely, yeah. So and you'll still hear that quite a lot. A lot of yeah. people still preach yeah. that and so on. And it makes sense, right? Because, yeah, I mean, the Bible is very clear that the truth is seen as a light, right? You are the light in my path and so on. So if this is a spiritual understanding, then it can very much mean the darkening of the truth, right? Or the fading away of the truth. You can expand it beyond the Catholic Church, though. So that goes back to what Ken was saying. This can include like communism, secularism, all those isms that exist. And you could even take it a step further than that and say, like there's for the last couple of hundred years probably, there's been a strong movement to discredit the Bible, right? So the idea that, you know, Moses never existed, or David never existed, Jesus never existed, or was just a regular person. He stole his ideas from someone else. You know, the Gospels were copied from something. You know, there's a lot of like historians that look for any sort of proof to say the Bible is fake, right? That would be the darkening of the truth, right? Because the Bible is the light. And so anyone that tries to darken the Bible would be what's happening here as well. So there's different ways you can look at it, right? In terms of what exactly is being darkened, right?
I look at the darkness when they talk about a third of the day and likewise the night and the stars. And I'm thinking, if you don't have starlight, if you don't have moonlight, this darker, darkness, yeah. This complete darkness, can you imagine the lack of information that people will be getting at that time will be so, you know, we have to know what is true before that time. There's going to be no knowledge at all sharing.
Well, here's the funny part. You can take this as literal because, I mean, tonight, go outside, you won't see stars, you know? We don't see a third of the stars that are actually out there because there's so much light now in the world that, you know, the stars have gotten darker, right? We don't see as many unless you're off in the bush somewhere.
Up in the country, where we lived,
For most people, they don't see the moon, the stars, you know, it is darkened in that sense. With pollution, even the sun, right? You get that smog, you get like that. So you can even take this as literal, you know. You can argue that it is literal, right? You can argue that this has actually happened on the earth, right? Things have gotten darker. I tend to push more towards a spiritual understanding, which is, we're talking about knowledge here and truth, and things like that. But you could definitely argue both ways. You can make a point to say, well, this might be physical. We know the 7 last plagues will be physical, right? We know that darkness is literal darkness. So it's very possible, going back again to the Egypt, right? That was a physical darkness that fell upon Egypt. So we can't just throw away the idea that it's, oh, this is spiritual and that's it. It's happened before, it's going to happen again, so it can happen now, kind of a thing. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on verse 12 here? We are going to read at least one more verse, which is the in-between verse before the 5th. All right, if not, let me jump to that one then. Right here. All right, so at the end of the 4th trumpet, and we see something very similar with the seals, kind of a thing. The first 4 seals are the 4 horsemen, and then it completely changes, right? And we get the last 3 are very different from the first 4, and in fact are much longer than the first 4. And with the trumpets, we're getting the exact same thing. The first 4 trumpets, 1 sentence, 2 sentence maximum. But from 5 onward, the 5th trumpet, that's an entire chapter almost, kind of a thing, right? It's a very long. The 6th one, very long. Plus it has that little commercial in there where we get an extra little story installed. So before that, though, we actually get this little break. So we've had the first 4. Then we're going to have this verse here, which is the break before we get to the 5th one. Does someone want to read this? This is Revelation 8, verse 13.
Sure. And I looked and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because the remaining blast of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound."
All right. So if nothing else, we know that the following 3 are worse than the first 4, right? So the first 4 are bad.
Is this God's 3 trumpets now?
These
The
are the
3
last.
angels?
These are the last. No, it's not the 3 angels message. It's not the
Oh,
3. Yeah, it's not that. But these last 3 trumpets, there's actually an angel that flies through the sky, basically saying, "Whoa, like, watch out. These next 3 are going to be bad." And in
okay.
fact, in between them, it'll say, the first woe is past, but there's still 2 more to go. 2 have passed, but there's still 1 more. So it very much highlights these last 3. And not only does it warn us like this, but the trumpets themselves, again, like I mentioned, are much more detailed, right? A lot more information, a lot more detail is given, which then also creates a lot of different understandings, right? The 5th and the 6th trumpet specifically, almost every generation has a different understanding of what these are. So if you look at the early, what's his name? The original guy.
Uriah Smith?
Yeah, so Uriah Smith had one idea. Maxwell has a different idea. This one changes quite a bit throughout history, which is interesting because there's so much detail that you would assume that it would be easy to understand. But for some reason, it's not. For some reason, it's still open to interpretation, right? There's quite a few ideas that kind of all fit, right? You can at least argue each idea. So that's why we're going to one day just for the 5th, one day just for the 6th, because that one will definitely have time or things to talk about. Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, but with the whoa, 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 the three times, that's really for emphasis, and you know how bad it will be then if you have that.
Yeah, and this is, and again, this goes back to what Ken said early on, right? Which is these trumpets are very much a warning from God, right? And that's what's happening here. This is literally God saying, watch out, these next 3 are gonna hurt, right? These next 3 you're gonna feel it. So it really emphasizes the idea that the trumpets aren't so much judgments of God as they are simply things that were gonna happen, and so God is warning us ahead of time. Lynette, go ahead. You have your hand up?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The inhabitants, because they need to be ready to change. They need to change because God is warning them.
Yeah, and that will actually come up. I can't remember which one it is, whether it's the fifth or the sixth one, where it actually says, even so, you know, the people of the world would not change, kind of a thing, right? Like they refuse to go to God. So yeah, very much it's exactly what a trumpet call is in the Old Testament, right? God is blowing the trumpet so that you open up your eyes, right? So you realize what's going on around you. Hopefully, you see the danger and you change, right? You react. Unfortunately, what God will even say is, it doesn't seem to help, right? Those that have accepted God, they just become firmer with God. But those who have been rejecting God seem to reject him even more, right? The same thing happens in the plagues. In the plagues, it repeats over and over again. Even so, you know, those that have the mark of the beast or whatever refuse to turn or refuse to change. So it's very much God warning people and giving them that chance to repent, to turn back to God. Yeah. Anything else that you find interesting in this verse here, verse 13?
Well, you know, there's some similarities between the trumpets and the bowls. And sometimes you can go to this particular one talks about darkening of the sun and so on. And you've got the fifth bowl talks about that the kingdom of the beast and so on become full of darkness. And that's the fifth bowl. And the fourth bowl has the sun becomes darkened.
Yeah.
And or it was given power to scorch men, and men were scorched with great heat. So these particular mention of these different planets or stars or so on, they again you find them coming up in the bowls, the 7 plagues.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned that last week, right? It is possible that the 7 trumpets kind of represent almost like a little, like a warm up to the plagues, right? It's like a warning to the plagues. So this is what's going to be happening when the plagues hit, right? So it's almost like a taste of what's to come. Very similar to like what Ellen White calls, you know, the little time of trouble before the big time of trouble, right? There's that very much, and again, very much it's based on God warning us. Listen, these things are about to happen in terms of like in a powerful way. So change now before you have to go through it, right? Change before these things happen to you. So that's definitely a different way of also looking at the 7 trumpets here.
But it's also like saying these catastrophes are coming.
Yeah.
But I'm the only one that can protect you from these. You know, he sees them, he knows them, he's permitting them because he's not stopping them. But he's saying it's just like when he was bringing the children of Israel out from Egypt. He says, you take the lamb and you take the blood because I know what is happening. All the firstborn will die. Yeah. And you put some lamb and the blood in the lintel, and you know, I'll protect you. These are the disasters coming. But if you trust me and do what I say,
there's a way
you will be protected. And I think the same with these. He's saying, in the world in which we live, there will be many catastrophes and chaos and many things to cause us to be very anxious. But he's saying, if you trust me, if you accept that I've died for you, your sins, and I will protect you, I'll give you the grace that you need. I will give you my Holy Spirit to keep you and to strengthen you to overcome. I'll give you the faith that you need. You have to learn to trust me in these circumstances. And I think this is what this play to me is reminding me that God, if I trust him, he will be the one to look over and to protect. But you know, that's why, you know, as you come later on in the other trumpets, the people who were sealed
Mm-hmm.
The punishment came on those who were not sealed. So
Yeah.
those who did not accept or believe, they were left in the open, and they suffered a great deal, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. When we get to the 7 plagues, there very much is a distinction between those that are sealed and those that are not, right? And that's important, because what that means is when the seals hit, that distinction has already been made. You've already chosen your side, right? Which is why, again, the temple is filled with smoke and the work ends and so on. Yvonne,
I just want to reaffirm this.
Yeah.
These trumpets that are sounding, are they warnings for us that what is going to happen?
Yeah, 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 yeah. When you read the Old Testament, there's actually a festival of trumpets, or a feast of trumpets, which comes before the Day of Atonement, and its whole purpose was they would blow the
Prepare.
trumpets so that Israel would be like, okay, where am I right now? What's my life situation? What are my sins? What do I need to change? So it was a way of preparing for the Day of Atonement, right?
Okay.
And in the same way, these trumpets is, again, to wake us up, to say where we are, so that we can prepare not for the Day of Atonement, but for the actual second coming, right? For like the Day of Atonement, the real one. So yes, absolutely.
Because that's why I was asking where it says here, the remaining blast of the trumpet of the 3 angels are about to sound. So that's why I was relating it to the 3 angels' message in the last days.
The only reason why I would say it's not the same is because and you'll see it when we read the last 3 trumpets, it's very different from the message of the 3 angels' message, right? And that's the thing. One of the reasons why I can see why you kind of mix the two together, because especially early Adventism, our image was 3 angels with trumpets, right?
Yeah.
But when you actually read the 3 angels' messages, does it actually say they have trumpets? I can't remember.
No.
No, I don't think
No, they just fly in the midst
they're
of
just
heaven
flying
with the
and
everlasting
speaking,
gospel.
right? Yeah, they're speaking.
Yeah.
But because we have that image in our head of 3 angels with the trumpets, we kind of you group the 2 ideas together. But when you read the 2 messages, they're very different.
It's
They're
totally
very
different. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I like to compare this with the story of with Ezekiel. When Ezekiel writes, when he was told to eat the scroll, and he was told to warn the people, that is, the people in Jerusalem, they were to do certain things. He said, listen, I want you to go as prisoners. Don't resist the Babylonians. Go and you'll make a life there. In 70 years, they'll bring you back. So Ezekiel is writing this, when you read the book of Ezekiel, about 4 or 5 years before Jerusalem is actually destroyed in 586 AD. So he's telling them that these are things that will happen. And he even relates to them the wickedness that we're doing, because he takes Ezekiel through the temple and he shows them how people are worshiping the sun.
Yeah.
They have these inscriptions on the wall, they're worshiping them. They have these image of jealousy, or, worshiping the women, worshiping Tammuz. And so he warns them and he tells them, if you listen to what I'm saying, these catastrophes are coming. Yeah. If you don't listen, they will destroy Jerusalem, they will break the walls down, and your sons and your daughters will be destroyed, killed by the Babylonians. Yeah. He says, but if you listen to me and you go willingly, you could go and build houses and live a normal life. Your children will be spared. Jerusalem will be spared. So do this. And they wouldn't listen. Yeah. See, I believe it's similar. God is saying there are catastrophes that are coming because of the wickedness of many people in the world. Yeah. Yeah. But if you trust me, you will be spared from many of these. Go ahead.
Yvonne, go ahead.
I'm just thinking that a little learning is a dangerous thing. And the reason why I'm saying this is that early Adventism, what was taught, there are people now, because of COVID, they're saying it's starting of the mark of the beast. And it's not so.
The
There's
mark of the
lots
beast is
more.
it's very precise what it is, and it's not a
Yeah,
physical thing, right? It's not a microchip. It's not, anything like that. The mark of the beast is a decision.
yeah.
It's a decision to not do the law of God and to follow the world. That's it.
But I think a lot of people are mixed up. They
Yeah,
have
yeah,
things
absolutely.
backward, just, oh.
But again,
Anyway,
I
so
mean, that's the world we live in, right? And I think that's where, the Revelation 8:12 really kicks in. Things are darkened, right? What used to be so obvious,
mhm,
now people are confused. Now the truth is confused. People talk about, you know, uh, fake truth and things like that, right?
yeah,
So we are living in a world that is darkened, right? We don't know what's real, what's not, what's true, what's false. We don't trust news. We don't trust politicians. We don't trust that doctors. Nobody, right? Like
nobody.
we're at a
Yeah.
point where we are very much in the dark, uh, and that's why I think, and I understand why people do it. That's why they say, listen, I'm just going to read my Bible and that's it. I'm not going to trust what anything else says. Um, the problem is, we still live in this world, and um, God still gives us messages that we need to listen to and follow for our own sakes and for families and so on. So it is difficult. I can understand why a lot of people um, don't know what to do, don't know what the answer is, right? Because there's so many messages, right? So many different things, and it gets confusing. It gets
That's
confusing.
why we have to develop our faith and trust in God
Yeah,
and let
and
Him
and that's why
direct
we
our
need to
path.
study the Bible, right? Like we're
Yeah,
doing today, just reading
yeah.
through it, asking questions, comparing it with other verses, comparing it with what other people are saying. So at least we can get okay, with this topic, we can get a clear picture and you can make your decision, right? You can make a choice. That's the safest thing you can do at the end.
So that reminds me, we were reading during, I think, sometime during the month in our devotional about Ellen White was talking about the Bible. She says the Bible it is its own interpreter.
Yeah.
And things that we find mysterious, if we study it carefully with prayer,
Yeah.
we can find the answers within the Bible itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even in this book of Revelation, in the very first chapter, it says, "Blessed is he who reads, and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written." So it gives you the impression that if you read and really study this thing, you'll understand it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and you can't just take one book or one chapter or what.
Mhm.
You need the entire Bible. That's why there's so much confusion nowadays, because unfortunately, I won't say most, but many Christian denominations don't read the Old Testament. They only read the New Testament, right? I was actually telling my wife just yesterday there was a 6-month-old child that died in the United States,
Yeah.
and the mother was saying, "Well, I was giving my baby the biblical diet, so he was vegan, right?"
What is
And
that?
people were going crazy, and then people were like, "Obviously, she's never read Acts 10, which tells us that we could eat whatever we want." Which is also wrong, right? Because and there was only one person that I read in the comments that said Acts 10 has nothing to do with food. It's about accepting Gentiles and people from outside of the religion. But unfortunately, um, that's what happens when you only read chunks. So you don't read the Bible, right? You only read kind of what you want to read, and you put the blinders on, and you get lost. And
Yeah.
that's why there's all this confusion in terms of, because the Bible explains itself, just like Ken said, right? It explains its own mysteries very clearly. The problem is you need to take time, you need to pray about it, you need to have the Holy Spirit, and you have to be guided by God to find those things, right? All right, let me close this here because I want to make sure we have some time for prayer. Let me stop recording.